Cold air has always been treated as the enemy. Modern advice tells people to seal it out, heat everything evenly, and trust mechanical systems to manage comfort and health. Old builders thought very differently. Long before HVAC systems, thermometers on every wall, and centralized heating, builders worked with cold air deliberately, precisely, and intelligently. They understood how it moved, where it settled, and how it could be controlled to protect health, preserve structures, and keep people alive through brutal winters. This knowledge wasn't theoretical. It was practical, field-tested, and rooted in survival. What follows is not folk wisdom or nostalgia. It is a rule of air movement that governed homes, bunkers, ships, and shelters for centuries, and it still applies today whether you live in a modern house, a cabin, or are planning for long-term grid-down conditions. Cold air always sinks, and old builders designed everything around that fact. Cold air is heavier than warm air. It drops, pools, and flows like water if given a path. Old builders never tried to fight this. They designed structures to control where cold air could go, where it could not go, and how it could be flushed out without losing heat. This single principle explains why old homes had sunken entryways, high sleeping platforms, raised hearths, and multi-level ventilation. In older houses, especially in Europe and North America, entry doors often opened into a lower section before stepping up into the living space. That wasn't decoration. When the door opened, cold air poured in and immediately sank into that lower pocket instead of sweeping across the room. The warmer air stayed higher where people lived and slept. This same principle was used in castles, monasteries, frontier cabins, and even early hospitals. So you can actually start using this idea right away by paying attention to vertical space in your own home. If you try to heat a room evenly from the floor all the way up to the ceiling, you're just wasting energy and, honestly, comfort. But if you let that cold air settle down low and focus on warming the area where you actually spend your time, higher up, you stay warmer and use less fuel. In real life, this means things like raised beds, putting thick rugs over those cold floors, and making sure you don't have cold drafts blowing right where you sit or sleep. Now, old builders, they had this figured out. They separated the air you breathe from the air down at floor level. These days, doctors mostly talk about temperature numbers, but back then, folks were more concerned with the different layers of air. The coldest air in any closed-up space, well, it settles right down at your ankles and along the floor. That air hangs on to moisture, dust, and germs a lot longer because it just doesn't move much. So, those old buildings were set up to make sure folks didn't have to breathe that stuff in. Sleeping platforms, for example, weren't just about being comfy, they were about staying healthy. Back in medieval times, beds were often raised several feet off the ground, and sometimes they'd even be enclosed with heavy curtains. That way, people could sleep up in the warmer, cleaner air layer, while all that cold air just stayed put down below. In the colder parts of the world, even benches and work tables were built higher up, so folks would stand or work above the chilly zone near the floor. You can apply this rule immediately. If you sleep close to the floor in winter, you're actually in the coldest, dampest air in the room. Raising the bed even 12 to 18 inches, well, it makes a measurable difference in warmth and respiratory comfort. In shelters or cabins, sleeping bunks should always be elevated, even if insulation is, limited. Ventilation was designed to remove cold, stale air without dumping heat. Old builders, they understood that air had to move, but they controlled the direction. Vent holes, flues, and chimneys were placed high, not low. This allowed warm, stale air to exit while pulling fresh air in slowly and indirectly. Cold air was never allowed to rush across living spaces. In many old homes, fresh air entered through small, low cracks or vents near the entrance, while smoke and stale air exited through high openings near the roof or chimney. This created a slow, upward flow. The cold air that entered sank immediately and warmed gradually as it rose. The occupants stayed in the stable middle zone. You know, modern homes often reverse this logic with poorly placed vents and fans. But hey, you can correct this by ensuring that air exits high and enters low, but indirectly. In a prepper or off-grid context, a simple high vent near the ceiling combined with a baffled low intake near an entryway can dramatically improve air quality without chilling the space. Cold air was used to preserve health, not eliminate it. Old builders did not aim for uniform warmth. They aimed for controlled cold. Cold storage rooms were placed below living spaces, using earth and sinking air to preserve food naturally. This kept perishables safe without contaminating living air with rot and moisture. In hospitals and monasteries, cold corridors separated sleeping quarters from kitchens and work areas. This limited the spread of disease by preventing warm, moist air from circulating freely. The cold air acted as a barrier. This is a principle modern medicine rarely discusses, yet it remains valid. You can apply this in modern homes by separating cooking, washing, and sleeping areas with cooler buffer zones. Even unheated hallways or mudrooms serve a purpose by trapping cold and moisture before it reaches living spaces. Heat sources were, placed to push warmth upward, not outward. Fireplaces and stoves in old buildings were rarely centered in rooms for even heating. They were placed low and near walls, forcing heat to rise along surfaces and circulate naturally. The goal was not to blast heat, but to create a vertical gradient. Warm air rising pulled cold air toward the heat source, where it warmed and joined the upward flow. This created a slow, continuous circulation without drafts. Folks positioned themselves above and around this movement, never directly in it. If you use a wood stove or heater today, it's a good idea to avoid directing heat at floor level. Let it rise naturally. Use heat shields and placement to encourage that upward flow. And, ceiling fans on low speed can really help redistribute warmth without disturbing the cold layer below. Old builders respected cold air as a tool, not a threat. The cold air rule is simple but unforgiving. Cold air will always sink, collect, and dominate any space that allows it to spread unchecked. Old builders worked with this reality. They trapped it, guided it, isolated it, and used it. Modern design often ignores it, relying on energy-intensive systems to compensate. For survivalists, historians, and anyone thinking long-term, this knowledge is not optional. In a power outage, a poorly designed modern home becomes unlivable quickly. A structure that respects cold air remains functional with minimal input. You can retrofit this thinking into your life by sealing low-level drafts while allowing controlled high ventilation, raising living and sleeping zones, using entry buffers, and accepting temperature gradients instead of fighting them. Comfort and health come from stability, not uniformity. Old builders didn't have sensors or medical journals, but they understood the human body in space. They knew where cold harmed and where it helped. That knowledge was carved into stone, timber, and layout. It still works because physics hasn't changed. If this kind of forgotten practical knowledge matters to you, subscribe to Warfield Prepper Chronicles. Share this with others who take history and survival seriously and keep these rules alive while they still matter.